Usually on the show, I like to cover products with uncommon facts that not many people know about. But then comes some products that are so forgotten, there's practically little to no videos made about it. And that's certainly the case with these two rather obscure trivia games: Austin Powers Operation Trivia and Backstage Pass. The story behind these games begins with its developer, Berkeley Systems. Berkeley Systems was originally formed in 1985 by Larry and Wes Boyd, a father and son team, and later Wes's wife Joan Blades when the company was incorporated in 1987. Initially, they developed innovative accessibility software, such as Enlarge, the first screen magnification product for graphical user interfaces, and Outspoken, the first screen reader for the Macintosh. They also developed a consumer product called Stepping Out for the Macintosh. But it wasn't until the release of After Dark in 1989 that the company started making headlines. The first edition didn't make a huge splash upon release, but the audience it was gaining encouraged them to create a follow-up, After Dark 2, which became the company's first big hit, eventually turning After Dark into a franchise. But Berkeley Systems knew that the screensaver craze wasn't going to last very long. After about a year of failed experiments, they soon landed another smash hit in 1995 with the irreverent trivia party game You Don't Know Jack, which also turned into a franchise. They also operated a little-known online gaming service called Berserk, but that's a story for another time. After selling off their Access Software division the year prior, Berkeley Systems was acquired by Sierra Online in 1997, and over the next few years continued to operate as a studio, mostly making You Don't Know Jack sequels, as well as a couple of licensed games, one of which was Austin Powers Operation Trivia. Now, Austin Powers, much like After Dark, didn't make a huge splash upon release. The first film, International Man of Mystery, was only a modest box office success. However, the cult following it received due to video rentals resulted in its sequel, The Spy Who Shagged Me, becoming a monster hit, as well as the third highest grossing film of 1999. So it's no surprise that a cash-in game would be released a few weeks prior to the film's premiere, on May 25th, 1999. Now, Operation Trivia is the more well-known game on this list. Fans of the franchise might know about it through the film's DVD release, which included a demo as one of its bonus features. However, it was also available for purchase as a standalone computer game. And does it hold up? Well, let's take a look. In Operation Trivia, Austin Powers is kidnapped by Dr. Evil, but rather than kill him, he's forced to play against Dr. Evil in a trivia game show called Win, Lose, or Die, and it's up to Austin Powers to beat him, or else Dr. Evil blows up the world. The game can be played with either one or two players locally, choosing between either Team Austin or Team Evil, based on the answer to a question given at the beginning of the game. The main voices are provided by comedian Colin Mahan, his first appearance in a Berkeley Systems title. He does the voice of the host bot, as well as spot-on impersonations of Austin Powers and Dr. Evil.
Pick a question, don't be a square. This question is the bomb. It's not luck. Oh, it's skill.
Colin would later go on to play a role in the David Gordon Green Halloween films, as the voice of Dr. Samuel Loomis. Operation Trivia contains over 500 questions, all based around pop culture from the 60s to the 90s, with each game consisting of 7 questions. Yes, only 7, putting it on par with You Don't Know Jack: The Lost Gold. For each question, a category must be chosen by either Team Austin or Team Evil, preceded by a psychedelic interlude with a swinging tune attached to it. The first question is a standard multiple choice, titled Need the Info, where a year and a question related to that year are given. The player who buzzes in first and gets it right wins $5 million. Otherwise, they lose $5 million. The second question is a stop and go-go, where you're given a clue and try to find 4 correct answers, while avoiding 3 decoys. The players can keep buzzing in until they either get them all right, get one wrong and lose everything gained in that question, or stop at the amount they're comfortable with. The third question is a keep away, where players sort the answers into 2 categories. The aim of this one is to buzz in whether or not it matches that category first, getting $1 million for each correct answer, and lose $1 million for each wrong answer. The next 3 questions are played pretty much the same way, with the point values doubled on both Need the Info and Keep Away. The final question is always a crazy chain, where each question leads to the next related question, without knowing the final answers until the end of the round. After the scores are tallied up, the player with the most money at the end of the game wins. And there's also some voiceovers during the end credits.
All I asked for was sharks, with frickin' laser beams attached to their heads.
Overall, Operation Trivia does sort of capture the feel of the films, despite it being a rather cheesy trivia game compared to Berkeley's previous titles. Reviews at the time, however, were quite mixed. CVG gave the game an abysmal 1 out of 10, calling it nothing more than You Don't Know Jack with a psychedelic paint job, while also criticizing it for not being localized in their home country. For those who don't know, CVG is a British publication. Another British publication, PC Zone, also compared the game to You Don't Know Jack, although they do acknowledge how unfavorable it might get. But, much like with CVG, PC Zone called the game a cash grab, and also criticized it for the amount of American culture questions, before giving the game a below-average 5.5 out of 10. Moving on to America, GameSpot gave the game a slightly less abysmal 3.8 out of 10, stating that, although the game starts on a fun and promising note, Operation Trivia quickly comes to resemble one of Dr. Evil's botched plots to take over the world. The review primarily criticizes the voiceovers, the game's repetitive nature, calls the keep-away question confusing, and ultimately described it as just a cash grab. They also pointed out the lack of online play, which in hindsight ended up being a good thing given what would happen in the .com space later. However, not all reviews were bad. IGN gave the game a positive review, calling it more fun than wrestling a tank full of mutant sea bass. The main praises went to the voiceovers, while also admitting that the game did get repetitive over time. Regardless, IGN gave it an 8 out of 10. GamePro gave the game an average 3.5 out of 5, praising it for its presentation and its authentic voiceovers, but they too also criticized it for its repetitive nature. Finally, Entertainment Weekly gave the game a B-, without giving too much of an explanation. In all honesty, despite the mixed reviews, the game is pretty fun. For an Austin Powers license. Sure, it's no You Don't Know Jack, but it's not meant to be. It's just a unique above-average trivia game with an Austin Powers theme to it, and nothing more. I can't say it's a great game by any means, but it's also not a generic below-average one either, as we'll get to later. For now though, it's time to shift gears and move on to the beta versions of the game. Yes, there are in fact pre-release builds of this game out there, which I was lucky enough to acquire off of eBay for only $13 plus shipping. So to start off, we have Beta 1, compiled on April 9th, 1999. Now, because the cover art was not ready at the time, the disc only has text printed on it. Now, this copy in particular is quite interesting, mainly due to the copyright disclaimer at the bottom. Yes, your eyes don't deceive you, there is in fact a copyright disclaimer for Jellyvision, who you may know today as Jackbox Games. Now, it's quite unclear as to why Jellyvision's name was printed onto this particular disc. Maybe it was because of Berkeley's working relationship with them at the time, borrowing a few concepts for their licensed game. Or maybe Jellyvision was secretly assisting them with the game, before they got booted midway through development. But hey, I'm not the one to make up weird theories here. The main installer is pretty much the vanilla installer used in various Sierra titles, while the README file is very different from the final version. As for the game itself, it plays pretty similar to the final build, but there are several notable differences. For one, the win, lose, or die intro is different. It isn't as animated as the final version, and it also lacks the flashing live text at the beginning. And because this is a beta, some of the graphics in the interludes aren't as polished as in the final version, so there's a lot of rough edges and white areas where some transparency would be. There's also plenty of graphical glitches, such as the transitions from the category picker to the actual question. In the Crazy Chain round, there's plenty of differences compared to the final build. First off, there's no tutorial music. Second, the money count for both players is shown on screen rather than hidden. And finally, there's no sound effects or music as the final scores are being calculated. The win, lose, or die outro is also different compared to the final version. Here, it plays before the credits rather than during the credits, and there's no TV beep at the end as far as I know. You may also notice some placeholder credits, as to be expected in development builds. Other than that, the gameplay remains pretty much the same as the final release. So now let's move on to Beta 2, compiled on April 27th of the same year. This time around, the Jellyvision copyright is nowhere to be seen on the front of the disc. As for the contents, the main program icons are pretty much identical to the ones in the final release. The README file was also updated, which at first looks identical to the final version, except for the fact that the user is being thanked for purchasing You Don't Know Jack the Ride. The gameplay in Beta 2 is pretty much identical to the final version, with some graphical glitches left over from Beta 1. The biggest difference, however, is the credits sequence. While it remains mostly the same in the final release, its font sizes are slightly different. Some credits were also moved or cut out entirely. For example, in the final build, Brad Mayer was removed from sound engineering and moved over to the sound editing and mixing credit. Beta 2 also lacks the reverse credit text effect present in the final build. Finally, there's a small bug on the executive producer credit, where part of the system's text is cut.
This is getting ugly.
Other than that, this build looks almost identical to the final version that was released. But we're not quite done yet. We still have to cover one other trivia game by Berkeley Systems, which also happened to be their very last. A rock and roll trivia game that goes by the name of Backstage Pass. It's a game so obscure, there's practically no videos about it. Not even Clint from LGR has heard of it, until I introduced it to him at the Vintage Computer Festival Midwest. So how did this become Berkeley's last product? Well, we gotta go back to history class with this one. On March 29, 2000, one day before the release of You Don't Know Jack Louder, Faster, Funnier, Sierra's then parent, Havas Interactive, announced that it would acquire Prize Central Networks, a website where visitors could register and play free games for virtual tokens, and then exchange them for raffles or prizes. It was essentially the online equivalent of Dave & Buster's without the food. It doesn't really sound delicious in hindsight, but to the public in the 90s, they ate it up. By 1999, Prize Central had surpassed Microsoft's MSN Gaming Zone as one of the most popular gaming networks, so it was no surprise that Havas wanted to use their system to attract new customers. They purchased the company for an undisclosed amount, and merged it with their online service, the World Opponent Network, a month later, forming Flipside.com, initially an online portal, before becoming a unified gaming service later on. As a result of the acquisition, Berkeley Systems was essentially split into two. The studio went to Flipside, while the IPs went to its publisher Sierra. Then at E3 2000, Sierra showed off several new titles, which included You Don't Know Jack Volume 5, later known as Fifth Dementia, You Don't Know Jack Volume 2 for PlayStation, later known as Mach 2, and of course, Backstage Pass. The latter was originally set for a September release, but was ultimately delayed by 2 months, being released on November 16, 2000. The main cover art shows a guitar in flames, with the main game logo in the back seat, while the subtitle takes on a larger role. The game boasts music from several licensed artists, such as Blink-182, The Supremes, Culture Club, and more. Below that are the Sierra Attractions and Berkeley Systems logos side by side. The game was also released as part of Sierra's All Play No Work campaign, hence this logo here. The back of the box contains some interesting claims. We've got your Ticket to Ride. I'm assuming they don't mean the Ticket to Ride game. Tons of original music by your favorite artists in full stereo. I much prefer high fidelity sound.
That's right! Deity! These headphones have Jesus built in!
The game also has fast-paced, addictive gameplay, which, considering I've played the game, is anything but. And then we have the screenshots at the bottom, which will come into play again in a minute. Oh, and let's not forget about the AT&T WorldNet service. Inside the box is another cardboard box, which, upon opening it, shows us the actual contents inside, starting with a business reply card, where you can enter a $1,000 software giveaway, which in no way is expired now. You may also notice Sierra is mentioned alongside Knowledge Adventure, the makers of Jumpstart. This makes sense as its parent company Havas Interactive owned them at the time. Next, we've got a $5 coupon from Toys for Tots, which was originally stuck on the front of the box. Unfortunately, when getting the clear sticker off, I accidentally ripped part of the box cover. Thankfully, I was able to glue some of it back on, with the only downside being the leftover residue. We've also got the main buzzer key stickers, A, M, and P, or AMP. Going back to those screenshots, you may have noticed that they retain the same Q, B, and P arrangement from the You Don't Know Jack games, but that's not what you get in the game itself. So I guess you could say it was falsely advertised on that front. The only logical reason behind this could be the fact that these screenshots were taken from an earlier build of the game, but we'll circle back to that later. Lastly, we've got the CD jewel case itself, with the back showing advertisements for the You Don't Know Jack snack pack as well as Fifth Dementia. Opening the jewel case reveals the actual disc itself, and considering that this is a new boxed copy, the disc of course is in great shape. The jewel case also contains the instruction manual, which provides basic instructions of how to install and play the game. Upon opening Backstage Pass, you'll be greeted with the Sierra Attractions logo, followed by what looks like a crappy 16-color screen grab of the Berkeley Systems logo.
Do you want to play the ultimate rock and roll trivia game? Well, we've got your Backstage Pass. Hey, ho, let's go.
The game starts up similar to You Don't Know Jack, where it asks for the number of players and their respective names. Afterwards, the usual instructions play, where the main goal is to get the most amount of money in order to win an all-area access Backstage pass. Try saying that 10 times fast. The game is once again hosted by Colin Mahan, whose performance isn't as good as in Austin Powers Operation Trivia. Backstage Pass contains over 600 questions, all related to the topic of rock and roll music, with each game lasting 11 questions. Much like with Jack, the player chooses a category for each question, followed by some rather cheap-looking animated segues. Sure, You Don't Know Jack in its later years did have some cheesy animations, but at least they had some sort of quality to them. Here, it looks like something a kid would make in Flash. It was clear that the studio was on its last legs when it came to quality. The questions themselves also aren't that unique. They're mostly generic multiple-choice questions related to rock and roll music, including hip-hop, rap, and disco, just to name a few. There were also a couple special questions thrown in. The first is Off the Record, where players listen to a snippet of copyrighted music from a selection of artists, and the player has to guess what the song or artist is judging by that audio snippet, with 3 additional hints as time runs out. And then there's Spot On, which essentially plays like the Jack attack, only it's played 2 times during the game, the second time being the final question. As with the other trivia games, the player with the most money wins. As the credits roll, a hand on the right holds a lighter, while a short musical loop plays in the background. Overall, Backstage Pass is kinda boring. It doesn't have the entertaining factor that You Don't Know Jack or heck even Austin Powers Operation Trivia has. If you're a music fanatic, then you might enjoy this, but for those looking for a good and funny trivia game, this ain't it. The game was co-produced by Martin Stryker, one of the last employees from Berkeley's golden years, and was also largely responsible for producing You Don't Know Jack. When it came to reviews, Backstage Pass barely received any. The only one I was able to find was from IGN, who gave the game an average 7 out of 10. So as you can probably tell, it was quickly forgotten, and it was a disappointment to those who grew up with Berkeley's products. But as stated earlier, it would be the last time the studio would ever release a new product. By the beginning of December, their website started redirecting customers to Flipside, ending the studio's decade-and-a-half legacy. So now let's take a look at the only pre-release copy that I have. Unlike with the Austin Powers games, the disc cover shows no specified date for this particular beta. However, looking inside the game's files, the latest I could find is July 31st, 2000. The first notable difference between the beta and the final version is the autoplay screen. Not only do we see a beta version of the logo, but we also see a John Candy look-alike head that the user could click on to install and play the game. In the final build, it was changed to the cover art from the retail box, with guitar picks as buttons. The beta version's icon also uses the same head with an orange tint, compared to the final version, which uses a guitar. Finally, the README file is recycled directly from You Don't Know Jack Louder, Faster, Funnier. Upon launching the beta, it cuts directly to the video intro, with no opening logos preceding it. The intro also lacks sound effects, and the voiceover starts a little earlier compared to the final version.
Do you want to play the ultimate rock and roll trivia game? Well, we've got your Backstage Pass. Do you want to play the ultimate rock and roll trivia game? Well, we've got your Backstage Pass.
As to be expected, the beta version contains some graphical glitches, and is also limited to 256 colors. Sadly though, this pre-release build retains the same AMP buzzer arrangement as the final version, and not the QBP arrangement as depicted on the box. Other than that, the gameplay remains pretty similar to the final version. The only major difference I could find was in Off the Record. Instead of one music snippet followed by the hints, it's one hint followed by a music snippet, another hint followed by another music snippet, one final hint followed by another music snippet, and then after the answer is revealed, one long music snippet. The most likely case as to why they cut it down was due to licensing restrictions, but you could also make the argument that it made this question type a little easier. The end credits are also slightly different. Aside from the graphical differences, the end tune is pretty much recycled from one of the intro tunes, whereas the final build uses a remixed version of that same tune. Also, after a portion of the end credits play, the game crashes. How nice. So it's safe to say that out of the 2 versions of Backstage Pass I've played, the final version is more polished. But either way, the game really isn't that good. So there you have it. Austin Powers Operation Trivia and its pre-release builds, and Berkeley's forgotten swan song, Backstage Pass, and its pre-release build. Overall, despite most people seeing these as just passable, it's quite fascinating to see the progression of a software product from beta to final, whether it's an operating system or a video game. I had recently binge-watched Inside the Box, a series of videos from Jackbox showing off the development of one of their party games, that game being Boomerang from Party Pack 9, and it was quite fun seeing the differences between the builds, and then comparing it to what we got in the end. Out of the two games that I've covered here, Austin Powers is the better product. It's also not that hard to find, as it sold fairly well during the Austin Powers craze of the late 90s. Backstage Pass, however, is far less common, with secondhand copies becoming scarce. Now, before I do end this episode, I know there's going to be some people asking the age-old question: are you going to archive these online? And the answer is, I would like to, but I don't know if I should. Now granted, I have archived stuff online before, like the first edition of After Dark, and the rare Berkeley Systems press kit I obtained. But those were a different matter. Since Austin Powers is a license and is still copyrighted under its current owner Warner Brothers, it would certainly be a target for copyright infringement. But I also don't want to receive angry comments from hardcore archivists either. However, considering that the final version of Operation Trivia is circulating the internet anyway, chances are I might put up the beta copies as well. Backstage Pass, on the other hand, despite being largely forgotten and clearly not being sold in over 2 decades, has an abundance of copyrighted music snippets that I don't think the music publishers would want out there. I guess it really depends on if there's enough of a demand for it. But at least you can breathe a sigh of relief that I do have the original and the sole pre-release build all backed up. Now obviously, Austin Powers Operation Trivia and Backstage Pass aren't the only things Berkeley Systems worked on, and their history definitely doesn't deserve to be thrown by the wayside, which is why I began work on a new documentary called The Rise and Fall of Berkeley Systems. It'll focus on the entire company's history, as well as the major roles they played in both the tech and gaming industries. So be sure to look forward to that in the future. But until then, I'm off to go play some real trivia. It just seems appropriate. Actually, now that I think about it, I'd much rather play this instead.